Hello, and welcome to Consciousness Coaching Level 1. This class is on the body as the map of the psyche. Every single thing that is happening in the body, internally and externally, is a roadmap back to the person's psyche, whether they know it or not. Molière said, "The mind has great influence over the body, and maladies often have their origins there." In a moment, we're going to look at the energetic structure of how the world was created energetically, and similarly our body, and it always starts with the mind. So the body is a map of the psyche. I want to really stress this first sentence. Your body is simply the materialization of every thought you have in your psyche. So something might pass through very quickly, and then you don't necessarily see it or hold it or house it. But anything that's notable in a person's body is a reflection of what's going on upstream in their head. So thoughts and emotions are just as material as the physical body. So I want you to imagine a thought and an emotion that is not fully processed in our model with a TED Talk as a brick. If that brick does not get broken down, does not get processed and turn into like grain of sand or dirt, then it builds up a blockage in the body. And that is what you see when you look at people. Even things like their anatomy, like if they have wide hips, can be a symbolism of gluttony or someone who is very abundant. Everything in the body is a mirror to the psyche. The body is the loyal servant to the psyche, and primarily your low-level consciousness. That's why it gets stuck in the body and is how we show up in the world. Scars, pain, and physical illness are linked to impure thoughts. So I had a client many years ago, and I gave her a homework assignment where she was to make a journal of every scar on her body. I did not know that she had had multiple surgeries. And she lifts up her shirt and she had all these scars. So all your scars are a roadmap to what war you have going on in your head. Pain is another indicator of what's going on. And of course, illness, no matter how insignificant it appears or how significant, is also linked back to these unprocessed thoughts, impure thoughts, and of course, the emotions that are attached to them. If I take you back to the symbol of the squared circle, all the way on the bottom of the screen, the outer circle is the universe, your connection to source. And then the inner circle is that same divine spark within your third chakra. What keeps you from feeling connected to the source and whole? What keeps you separate is the triangle, your impure thought, and your square, which is your body and the emotions attached there. So the illness, that square, the body part of this model, is linked to the thought. So thought, emotion, and the physical body are sort of the boundary we think that keeps us from source. And we'll talk a bit about why illness is necessary sometimes to get back into the body and to get back as a connection to source. Oftentimes, though, it starts as the opposite. It starts as a way to feel that you don't need a body because you are source, you are that outer circle, you are spirit. And so the function of illness is linked to being common, just a commoner. And when you create illness, it actually creates space in your life for you to become the priority in your life. A lot of times people, for example, perfectionists, will not say no. They'll do many things, try to do it perfect, although perfection doesn't exist. And sickness is a result of them getting permission from themselves subconsciously to change their thoughts and to become human, because illness brings you back in the body. And many people, due to impure thoughts or pain or trauma, have been dissociated. Every single archetype is linked to a body part. We see this in astrology. So Neptune, for instance, the snow globe or the innocent is linked to the feet. So every sign in astrology is linked to a particular organ, and it could tell us what archetype the person is living out or what they're struggling with in life. So for instance, the feet being walking firmly on the ground, taking small steps, walking slowly, being very clear as to where you're going, not just living in la la land, is all linked to that Neptune, that innocent archetype where that snow globe concept all comes from, the delusion. So Chiron. Chiron is what I call finding your divinity through your humanity. As you can see, Chiron is a centaur. He is half animal and half human. This is us. We are half animal with our consciousness, our low-level thoughts, our veiled self, our emotions, and we are divine or human because we have the ability to raise consciousness. Where Chiron's midpoint is the third chakra, the 48 to 52. This is where these models are built on. You need to meet your animal consciousness and your divine consciousness, or your earthly and your spiritual nature, right here in the midpoint. So why we emphasize the Vesica Pisces, the 48 to 52, the third chakra, the midpoint, all of this is related to how we get healthy. We have a divine nature, but it has to be in the body that we live out what we come to do. Our lower chakras tend to be linked to more low-level consciousness or animal desires and needs like sex and food and tribe. And our higher consciousness or our higher chakras tend to be linked to like our heart chakra, compassion and vulnerability, speaking to source or intuition. The connector is found here at the third chakra. I'll show you another image of Chiron in a moment. Our divinity, higher chakras, can only be expressed through the body. When you leave the physical form at death, you cannot burn karma and you cannot raise consciousness. So this is extremely important to understand that we need a body in order to grow spiritually, in order to transmute these things that we want to transmute from our lower consciousness. So we have to be in the lower consciousness in order to raise the consciousness. We cannot transcend, we cannot dissociate, we cannot grow spiritually if we try to transcend above the body or dissociate from the body. We need to be in the body in order to live out our divinity. So again, here is Chiron the centaur. And I chose this particular image because he's holding this bow and arrow. For those of you who like astrology, Chiron actually is the ruler of Virgo. One of the reasons why I mentioned perfectionism. Virgo is the body. Virgo is the physical health, the day in and day out routine that we do. However, he's often represented as a symbol for Sagittarius. Sagittarius is one pointed consciousness where our dual natures connected, our earth and spirit, our light and dark, our male, female, is a one pointed consciousness. So hence his arrow and what I put here to indicate the third chakra. You cannot connect the lower chakras or the animal nature of Chiron and the divine nature of Chiron, again, representing ourselves, without the third chakra, which is self-worth, the fire element, choice, free will, individuation, and self-worth and self-love. So the second chakra, for instance, is linked to eros love or passionate love. Yes, we like sex and money and things. Then despite having that lower consciousness, we love ourselves, third chakra, and then we can move into the fourth chakra and love another, agape love. So this is really the seatbelt. This is the root of all of it. The fire element, the third chakra, the crown of jewels. This is how we unify both light, dark, male, female, higher, lower consciousness, duality aspects of self. So all illness is spiritual. all illness is linked to the creation of how energy is created and things are materialized. So the Akash is the Akashic records or the ether, and this is the highest plane that humans have access to. So when the Akash decides to start to incarnate, if you will, the universal consciousness, think of the outer circle in our logo, it becomes air, which is linked to the thought and the triangle. Then it becomes, or actually this is written wrong, I'm sorry. Air then becomes fire, which is our third chakra, which is our ability to choose and burn, through what next is water, which is the emotion we learned at pregnancy, which then creates the earth. So it's Akash, air, fire, water, earth. Now, we cannot change the origin story. So the Akash, which is having chosen our parents due to past karma, stored in the Akash, forces us into conception, the air where we get our thoughts. However, we can, fire is next, and I apologize for the mix-up. We can control the fire, which then allows us to transmute the emotion and set boundaries and change the earth, which is the materialization of our body. So we actually have more power than we think. So there's a reason, there is a reason that the order of creation is this way. The Akash, your parents, your story, your karma, your impure thoughts of conception can never be changed. Fire and the way you use your fire, don't use your fire, will determine how much water, how emotional drowning you have, and of course, how sick you will get in the earth. If you use the fire appropriately, then your water will be contained. You'll feel your feelings, but they won't overrun you, and your body, the earth, won't break down. But all illness is spiritual because it all starts here in the Akash. Illness is linked to power loss, your boundaries being violated, sacrificing your own integrity and value system, and we're going to talk about that momentarily, to get your needs met, and internalizing limiting beliefs. If you're into astrology, this would be your squares. Squares are those inner critic voices. This is what your inner child is telling you in the TED Talk in step 2. And if you really believe you're worthless, if you really believe you don't deserve to be listened to or whatever comes up, then those limiting beliefs will show up in the appropriate body organ that has that same linkage, the function of the organ, which we'll talk about. But when we finally trickle down into the earth element and we lost our power in the earth, we violated our boundaries in the earth, we sacrificed our integrity, our values to get our needs met in the earth. I'm talking about in your story. Then illness shows up as one of the only ways to create space so that we can actually take our power back. So in shamanism, we view illness as initiation. It is not uncommon that people start to seek spirituality or what's beyond when they are sick. So cancer, arthritis, osteoporosis, tumors, aneurysm, someone dies, a physical illness, and they want to know why. So that question of why often sets people off in an initiation, and it's often due to illness. All illness is energetic, as I said before, and this is a primary belief in shamanism as well. It is believed to be an initiation process. It gets you seeking. That's simply what the initiation is, to seek to go within. It's also a purification process. Every impure thought must travel through the body and must be eliminated out of the body. We use the body to purify. If you think you're worthless and you continuously think that, the body won't purify in terms of getting it out as feces or urine or sweat or emotion, but rather it'll build up like a brick and it'll show up in the organ. And therefore now it has materialized. This is what we really want to try to avoid. We want to try to fully feel feelings and have clients own their emotional states and feel those emotions fully so that they can eliminate getting sick. But one of the things you're going to learn in Consciousness Coaching 3 is that we will give sacrifices and offerings every single time we choose ourselves. And inevitably, it will be linked to something processed in the body, most often illness, even if it's just one day of a cold or a migraine. So the body is constantly purifying whatever we're thinking. Whatever you're feeling, just go up to the past 24 to 48 hours and the answer will be there. In the Vedas, sick children are oftentimes a reason for parents to seek spirituality. It's one of the reasons why people actually start to seek. Illness also serves a function for those of us that have been very traumatized or dissociated or narcissistic and want to believe that we don't need a body. It reminds us that we need a body to grow spiritually. It reminds us that we need a body in order to get to that midpoint of Chiron, the low consciousness and the high consciousness. So on one end, when we break down our body, the narcissist in us is saying, I don't need the body. I am beyond the body. I can do this in altered consciousness or altered reality, and the body is a nuisance. Not true, but that's one meaning. The other meaning is I've dissociated and I don't know how to get back into my body from this trauma. So I create illness as permission to get back in the body and set the boundary that I couldn't set on the onset of the trauma. So the body and the illness serves several functions. And what it'll do is it brings us back to the present moment. It reminds us also that we are limited and we need to be limited, because if not, we would be destructive. But illness at its source is related to a loss of power and a violation of boundaries, because someone violated perhaps your body or your even emotional, energetic boundaries. And if you were unable to speak up and purify, it can show up as illness. So illness is an initiation in shamanism. There's actually a word that says shimbiyong, and it means spirit sickness. It's oftentimes shamans will begin any spiritual initiation because of this. We also see that this spiritual sickness, it could be linked to losing yourself or feeling that you're not in the body, or you don't have a boundary, you don't know how to speak up for yourself. There's many ways of this is linked to spirit sickness to indicate again that all illness is spiritual. So we're going to learn how to bio decode illness. Bio is the biology, the body part, and it has a code in it that tells you what the client's thought is that they're struggling with. They chose the body part to have the illness because it's teaching them something. So again, the body is responding to the thoughts and the emotions that are material. Again, think of a brick. All illness is trapped. So that brick, which is the thought and emotion, is material. It's trapped as unprocessed thought and emotion. And so where the body signals the meaning of the organ is linked to the thought and the emotion the person could not process. So here are a few examples. People that tend to have a lot of brain issues, imagine a brain tumor, are trying to think a rational solution for a problem that needs to be beyond the intellect and rather need to connect to intuition. Heart issues are linked to the home. Kidneys, fear and indecision, absolutely fight or flight, and the fear kicks in, probably holding themselves hostage from a prior decision that they made or they deemed that made a mistake. The stomach, because it has the HCl, is something the person cannot digest, cannot break down, and they might need more hydrochloric acid in an attempt to break it down. This is not physical. What they're trying to do is tolerate a thought that they're having. The liver is linked to bitterness, and in the myth of Prometheus, his liver is eaten out every day by vultures. So think of vultures in the person's life or how they appear as a vulture that makes them bitter. The bladder has to do with urine, marking territory, and control. Intestines tend to be with something the person cannot digest or let go of. You can often have diarrhea where they need more and more and more of the intestine, or they're constipated and they just cannot let go of it. So they have more and more and more inside. The spleen has to do with mediation, melancholy, wanting to feel a peacemaker. The pancreas, they need sweetness and joy in their life. The lungs have many things. The lungs carry grief. It's also linked to mother because remember, when you come out of the womb, the first thing you do is cry and they slap your lungs so that you'll breathe on your own. So lung issues, asthma have a link back to the breath, have a link back to wanting perhaps to be an identity of your mom or the child of your mom. Thyroid issues have to do with time. Technically, hypothyroid would be life is too fast, I have to slow it down. Hyperthyroid, life is too slow, I have to speed it up. And Hashimoto's is I don't know how to control my time. Sometimes it's too fast, sometimes it's too slow. The eyes have to do with clarity, illusion, wearing veils. What are you failing to see? So when I teach health psychology, I teach the biodecoding, and the primary question, and I actually ask my client this question: what is the function of the organ? Let them come up with the answer, because when you hear them, then you can see or listen to what they're thinking. If they say the function of the lungs is to breathe, then they're probably saying, I need help breathing, or I need help catching my breath. Or, as I mentioned, going back to mom, when someone breathed for me. So it's good to ask the client what they think the function of the organ is, even if it's just very simplistic. Then you can chime in with more detail. So for instance, the skin, what gets under your skin? Or the eyes, what are you refusing to see? I had a client who was having difficulty with his eyes, and he was very much about living in higher consciousness. And because the eyes are linked to stealing your fire and the deadly sins, he kind of started only wanting to see with his third eye. So I said, what low level consciousness in you and in others are you refusing to see? So as you know your client, you can ask different variants of the question. I had a client this week who started having these sensations on the left side of his ribs, around like a tickling sensation. And I said, what's the function of a sensation? What is it when you have sensation? And we identified that it was life. I'm alive. When you sense, when you have sensation in your body, you're living. And he was at the end of the work with me, going into spiritual adult. And now he was finally allowing himself to live. Where do you lack joy or sweetness in life? This could be with the pancreas. This could be also diabetes. This could be any sort of blood sugar regulation issues. And sugar, obviously, is the sweetness. How did your mom take care of you when you were sick? This is a classic question I ask clients. The way your mother took care of you when you were sick, primarily the mother, it could be the father or grandparents or the caretaker, is very much linked to how you will get sick. So I have a client who is a self-acclaimed hypochondriac. His mom would take him to the doctor all the time. So that's what he does. He takes himself to the doctor all the time. It's the way he sort of checks in and says, oh, mom is with me. She loves me because I'm doing what she did. The other thing is, how did your parents take care of themselves when they were sick? Since everyone's a mirror and we're basically everything representing mom and dad, we can always extrapolate to them. Illnesses are either scarce in nature or abundant in nature. And this is linked to our minds. So I'll use the example of hips. The other day I asked a woman if she had any hip issues, because I could see in her astrology chart that she was very gluttonous in nature. She's like, I don't have any hip issues, but I do have very wide hips. So the organ and related to the mindset, scarcity issues, for instance, might show up as osteoporosis or structural issues, because scarcity is linked in the psyche to limits, and the structure of the body is what limits. Abundance illnesses are cancers. So for instance, I wanted more of my children. I had breast cancer, many tumors on the left side. The left side of the body is the feminine and the children, and the right side is the masculine and lovers. So we can do a statement of the body part, its function. Is it scarcity or abundance issue? Does the client want more or less of that organ? And so there's a way to biodecode the illness. All illness is narcissistic. You either don't want the body, or you want to be reminded you are the body. So tribal narcissists, the lower chakras, people very much as pleasure as pain, are more narcissistic in wanting to be only the body and forgetting the spirit. And those of us that are more transcendental narcissists want to be out of the body because we want to be more transcendent in nature. So we need our values to be clear in order to be in good health. So in addition to the function, in addition to biodecoding, in addition to the thought, what is linked to illness is also self-betrayal. One of the things when you have a client that has health issues is you have to talk about their value system, partly owning their bad bucket values that are linked to the vices or the hydra heads, and identifying their good values or the light bucket values, and having defined terms around these values so they don't self-betray. Remember, all illness is energetic, it's all spiritual, and it all results from a power loss and a loss of boundaries. What gives us boundaries is our value system. The word valer means to be in good health. Valer in Spanish also means to be of worth, the third chakra. Health only comes from having a solid value system established on your belief system. So one of the activities I do with clients is, what are your top 2 values? And it cannot be family. You cannot have your family as a value system, because your family already gave you your bad bucket values. So they're already in your psyche. Everything you judge in the TED Talk in the second question is linked to the sins or the vices or the ripus that are the bad bucket values that are causing you the health issue in the first place. So first, it's getting the client real honest that they have those bad bucket values, but then getting really clear on what their top 2 values are. So for instance, mine is spirituality and leadership. And I have a very clear chart on my leadership qualities, how they're defined, how I measure them, and the same for my spirituality. So you have to identify with the client their top 2 values. It might be similar to their parents, but you really want to make sure that they're honoring their values and not their parents' values. The likelihood is that it's going to be somewhat related to something that their parents taught them. We don't veer that far from our parents' values, but we definitely can do them differently. So some values could be honesty, authenticity, service, integrity, truth, depth. Most people look at me like I'm crazy when I ask this question. They either don't know what I'm talking about, they Google it, they look at me and say, I don't know what that means. So we're in a big problem here when we have most people do not know their values, that they can't even name them, but much less define them. So our job is to help them define and measure them. This is something we will do in the adult steps. This is going to be linked to the needs, steps 4 and 5. But in a session, especially if there's health things, once you biodecode the illness and you track the impure thought that they're struggling with, the bad bucket value, then we can look at the antidote, the good bucket values. The reality is that most times the good bucket value comes from the parents and is already in their good buckets. So honesty, for instance, is an important value of mine, integrity, truth. And my main bad bucket value I struggle with is pride. So when I question humility, I asked my dad one day, I say, how do you stay so humble? And he's like, I had the most humble mother. So the antidote to the bad bucket is probably in the good bucket somewhere. And from there, the client is probably going to find their value system. It's not always the case. It might be hidden, but it tends to be somewhat related. So you can have the conversation how they have lived up to these values. And again, if they don't know what they are and they surely can't define them, they're going to struggle. That's expected. And how have you violated them? Because again, all illness is spiritual, boundaries were violated. So we help clients define and measure in clear, observable terms what their top 2 values are. This is going to create the boundaries in the rule book. So pillars of health. One of the activities I do with clients is I get them do their pillars of health. So I put here financial, sexual, spiritual, emotional, and physical. This is another way to set up the rule book and have them write 2 values around their financial health, their sexual health, their spiritual health, their emotional health, and their physical health. So for instance, physical health, 3 times a week for 20 minutes, I'll walk on the treadmill. Spiritual, 5 minutes in the morning, I'll sit in silence 3 days a week. Sexual, I won't have sex on the first date. So we can help them write rules around their life once they have their values clear and which pillar it goes onto. The client may not start at the beginning with such clarity around them, so you can start them off with just the first 2. Be clear and then have them connect to their body to see if the truth or the value that they're writing feels true to them. We want to get them comfortable in their body. So lastly, I want to talk about the myth of Hercules and Hippolyte. And this is linked back to what I was saying earlier about how every single thought is purified through the body. Every single thing that the client is feeling physically, no matter how insignificant, is linked to an impure thought. The impure thought has to come from conception, from the bad buckets. You TED Talk it, and it has to purify through the body. So after a session, once we TED Talk, I tell clients, do not be surprised if you feel depleted, tired, have a migraine, break a toenail. The body will purify the TED Talk. However, the more you TED Talk things, the less the body has. That brick is now turned into sort of grains of sand. It has less to do. If a person lives 20, 30, 40 years not processing their thoughts and emotions, the overcharge in the body to purify is going to be that brick. So in the myth of Hercules, Hercules was given the girdle of Hippolyte. You see her in the picture handing it over. Look at Hercules' stance. He's in a fighting stance. His foot is up, his sword is up. He is ready to attack her. And he does, and he actually kills her. So this is what happens. If Hercules is those thoughts that we can't control, that are always on the defensive, waiting to be attacked, if this is the person's psychology, just like if they don't ever attack and they're constantly internalizing all of that anger and fear, either way, then we kill or we destroy the body because we don't know how to purify our thoughts. And so this myth, in this quick version of it, is to indicate how the thoughts are always purified through the body, and the body gets beat down, and in this case she was killed because he wasn't paying attention to his emotions or his thoughts. The second part of this myth is that once he saw that he killed her, he was appalled. He was terrified. And what he did was he saw Hesione was drowning and he jumped in and he saved her. And this is what we do. We have these thoughts, we have these emotions, we beat ourselves down. Our body takes the brunt of it. And then what happens? We go into a fasting, a cleanse, some sort of purification mode. And this is all having to do with thoughts. It's the dog chasing its tail, where these thoughts never go away. So if we process them, it's less on the body, and then we have to beat ourselves up less because we have strong boundaries. We have a strong value system. It doesn't mean that you're not going to still fight with your Hydra. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be 100% certain, but it's going to give you much more clarity in how to show up in the world. So this is the step of the model where we start talking to clients about healthy eating and exercise. Let me be very, very clear. You can eat McDonald's every day and you can drink green juice every day. If your thoughts are not being looked at, it doesn't matter what you're putting in your body. So start with your thoughts and your emotions and your desires. And then truth 6 on a spiritual path is a truth of purification. Then we start to structure a body, a diet, an exercise regimen. It's not the other way around. There's a reason why this is truth 6. Again, asking how mom took care of the client when they were sick. And obsessive purification has to do when the person is so impure in their thought or think they are. It's a judgment. It's not that it's true. They've internalized these limiting beliefs so much, they have to need a constant purification with diet, exercise, juicing, fasting, a man cleanse, laxatives, all of those behaviors that are obsessive about purification, showers, bleaching, OCD, all of these tendencies are linked to impure thoughts that they're trying to cleanse and rid themselves of, that they haven't looked at. Without looking at those things, that client is on their way to physical illness. So this is really important part of the work that we do. Thank you.